morning and good evening, depending where you are joining us from. I'm Giuliano D'Anico, and a very warm welcome to this Megaproject CEO Global Keynote Series on behalf of IPMA and University College London. So this is part of our scientific exploration to bring conversations on leadership and management in major megaprojects and share that knowledge to many countries across the globe and hopefully improve megaproject delivery practices. So we are delighted to welcome today Matt Palmer, who is the Executive Director of Lower Thames Crossing. And Matt has a fantastic track record in leadership positions, previously at Heathrow, and I'm sure he will say more about that in a minute. So before we go into Matt's presentation, just a few house rules for questions. We have a very large audience joining us today, so the chat box is not going to work. If you have any questions, please do send them to the Q&A box about all the topics and burning questions. That's exactly what we want to explore with you, so don't be shy. And we'll come back to questions after Matt's presentation at the end of the webinar. Okay, so Matt, thanks very much indeed for joining us today and for making the time to share the practices that you and your team are developing in Lower Thames Crossing. Without any further ado, over to you. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Giuliano. So, as Giuliano said, I'm Matt Palmer. I'm the Exec Director for Lower Thames Crossing. I actually have three hats. So I run Lower Thames Crossing, which is a £9 billion mega tunnel, let's say, or a mega project, depending on how you want to describe it. I'm also obviously a National Highways Exec Director. So I'm part of the bigger entity that's National Highways, and we run the UK's network system. And sort of just to give you an order of magnitude, that's over a 5-year period, that's about a £25 billion spend. So this is a large part of that. And then my last hat is I'm also part of UK's Construction Leadership Council, which is a government and industry coming together on how we drive the UK industry forward. And I sponsor a thing called Construct Zero, which is about how we decarbonise construction. So no apologies, I'm about to talk quite a lot about carbon, but I'll talk about more general things as well. So I've got a number of slides which are kind of going to walk us through a narrative which is around what is Lower Thames Crossing, how does it fit, what actually does that mean in terms of its strategic context, and then what's our management and leadership response to it, and sort of an amusing conclusion at the back end, which we'll get to. And my intention is to do that for about 40 minutes, and we'll then go to questions for 15. It might be, hopefully, I might go quicker, and you might get more questions. So let's just do a bit of context then on the crossing itself. So the left-hand side of the screen is London, and what you've got is 17 crossings of the Thames, the largest river in the UK, and there's only one to the east, an existing crossing called Dartford. And what the Lower Thames Crossing does is it puts a further crossing out to the east of that at scale, so it doubles the number of crossings to the east of the UK. The stats on the top just give you a sort of feel for some of the interest and why we're doing it. So the first crossing opened in 1963. Actually, it's 60 years old as of last Friday. So we almost timed it perfectly with this conversation. So we've got a 60-year-old tunnel that was then expanded a couple of times with another tunnel and then a bridge that exists, but it doesn't run brilliantly, and it runs well over capacity on a daily basis. The numbers per year are sort of 50 to 51 million crossings per year between 6 a.m. and 10 p.m. And interestingly enough, the locals vote with their feet. So when we ask the local community, do you use it? Only 0.1% of commuters actually go across the crossing because of the problems of it. So let me explain about that to some extent. I suppose the other thing to say about the actual crossing itself, unlike most of the road network in the UK, which runs at about 10% heavy goods vehicles, the crossing it is running at 40%. It's a very, very heavy goods route. And that's driven really by the fact that the proximity of Europe via the Dover Straits. So we have both the Port of Dover and the Eurotunnel delivering a significant proportion of UK goods into it, and actually the bulk of those then go across the Dartford crossing as they head north into the broader part of the UK. So we're a nationally significant project, although we are based down in the southeast of England. It's always probably worth just reflecting on the pandemic. So post-COVID, in the UK, we've seen rail numbers come back, but not significantly back to where they are normally. So about 50% business journeys, etc. On the road network, so our strategic road network, we've seen we're back up to pre-pandemic levels. Interestingly enough, it's that the flows have changed. So we're seeing weekends much busier than during the week. So that's sort of UK wide. However, on the crossing that this is alleviating, we've seen no change whatsoever, except what we've actually seen is a reduction in cars and an increase in HGVs. So we're seeing more goods and less people choosing to drive over it. But the numbers are exactly the same. And it's been that way for about 8 years. So this is an incredibly stable, incredibly well-used crossing that is 60 years old. And as a result of its age, it is by far the worst performing part of the UK motorway network. I sort of flippantly describe it as the worst in Europe, and arguably it's the most reliable traffic jam in Europe. You can guarantee we can find you a traffic jam at Dartford if you want to find one. So every 15 minutes we will close one of the tunnels on the Dartford crossing because of its geography and the nature of the goods going through it. So that is to some extent planned. So every hour we'll shut 4 times a minimum and escort goods or heavy goods or abnormal loads through. But over and above that, because the tunnels they aren't straight, they tend to bend. We tend to get over 3,000 incidences per year on only 1 mile or 1.5 kilometers of road network. So to run that 1.5 kilometers or 1 mile of road network, we have 300 people 24/7 dealing with these incidents. So we at this right at this moment now, we've got 50 people sat waiting for something to happen. And that's everything from breakdown trucks through to people who can close the routes and divert the traffic. It is that predictable that it is worth us to have 300 people on 24/7. So you get a feel for the complexity, the difficulty of it. And as you can see by the stats, the number of journeys take longer and are difficult. So then we start talking about so that's the problem we're trying to solve. We're trying to solve this problem of aging piece of infrastructure that has economic impacts in terms of traffic delay, etc. And the answer is Lower Thames Crossing, which is further out to the east, as I said earlier. It's essentially a new motorway link that links between the M25, which is the orbital motorway for London, down onto the A2, which is one of the main arteries going down towards the ports. And you can see it on the diagram. I think the sort of other piece that's this diagram tries to highlight is the thickness of the lines, is the volume of the traffic that goes over the crossing. And so what you can see is, although we're only building 22 miles of road, or 22 kilometers of road or 14 miles of road with a big tunnel underneath the Thames, we actually impact nearly 1,400 kilometers of road network, which is what those arteries. So we're replumbing, as I describe it, the southeast of England south and east of England, completely changing traffic flows. So it has a massive impact across the southeast of England, but predominantly it's focused around freight. The stats down the left-hand side, I'm not going to go into them significantly, are everything we're doing. I think the one thing to say, though, although it is a road, we do have 2.5 miles of tunnel underneath the Thames, 2 very large bore tunnels that will take 3 lanes in each direction. So we argue about whether we're the 4th or 3rd largest diameter tunnel, and I think we're currently sat at the 3rd largest diameter tunnel ever constructed in the world. And so we do have a degree of engineering complexity, but limited, I would say. This is a very long timeline to get us to basically where we are today, roughly. And it was really this is just trying to get under the skin of what's our biggest strategic challenge. And I'll talk more about the context of the UK in a minute. but it's taken us a while to get here. We started back in 2009, and we are now down the bottom right. So we're about to award our tunnels contract, and we're about to complete our sort of planning examination, which then leads to a government decision to go next summer. But what you can see, if you just look at glance along the top line, is the number of consultations we've done, and that's driven by a planning process that in the UK, I think we would argue probably that is broken. So it's taken us since 2009 to get to where we are. The plan is that we will start construction as fast as government wants us to after June 24 next year, when our planning process is finished. And that's somewhere around 25 or 26, with us opening in 2030. So 2030 to 2032. So this project is of this decade. And as I said at the beginning, it's a £9 billion program. So it's not huge, but it's not tiny either. It's a mid-sized mega project. Now, when talking about mega projects, just really, I'm aware we got an international audience, and it's probably worth just reflecting on the UK context around mega projects and where we fit in that world. Now, currently, we've got 3 mega projects busy moving along, and they vary in size and complexity. So you've got everything from the Tideway Suva. We've got HS2, which is dominating the UK construction market, and then you've got Hinkley down in Somerset, which is a nuclear power station, which is quite a long way into construction. And then Sizewell C, its sister up in Suffolk, which is about to start. And they're kind of the mega projects out there, and they're of a generation, of the last 10 years. They were generated, or they were designed, should I say, back in the early 2010s. And now if you go to where we are now, there's kind of the next gen of mega projects coming down the pipeline is Lower Thames Crossing. We're first, and East West Rail is a bit behind it. It's another big project to do a rail connection. But obviously, we're talking about Lower Thames Crossing. And I think the key point to make is we are the next gen. So we've got lots of construction practice being executed at the moment at scale, at much bigger scale than Lower Thames Crossing. But that is of 10 or 15 years of age. And I think the realization that we should all have is actually expectations of how you do these projects change dramatically over time. And that's certainly what we're finding. The other bit of UK context is this, which is deliberately a detailed, rather depressing table with lots of red on it. So this is the large planning applications that run through the UK. They're called DCO, Development Consent Order planning applications. So this is the last 2 years, so back to early 2021. And so these projects go through the largest sort of permitting system we have in the UK. And what you can see is that the red denotes delay, and you'll notice some of the delay is benign, sort of 20 days, but there's 655 days so far on some, 774 days on others. So what you can see, and you can see on the left-hand side, you can see whether they're roads or they're energy projects, predominantly wind. So what you're noticing is actually a significant delays happening due to permitting. And that's back in 2008, we brought into place a planning act that it ran fine to about 2016, but ever since then, it's got more and more problematic with these delays, which means that bringing projects into being in the UK is probably the most challenging at the moment as it has ever been, and arguably more challenging than the last 30 years that went before it. I suppose then the other part, which relates actually to the delays you're getting in planning, of course, is the expectation difference as life has changed around sustainability more generally, and on this slide in particular, carbon. So those in the UK will be fully aware of this. Those overseas might not be. But in the UK, we have had for a while now a series of carbon budgets, which are designated CB1 to CB6 on that graph, and there are a response to net zero by 2050. And so we've been chuntering our way through those over the last few years, and you can see the white line coming down is UK-wide emissions, predominantly at the beginning driven by coal fire, moving away from coal-fired power stations. So most of our reduction to date has been about conversion away from coal. and to some extent outsourcing of manufacturing overseas has led us to be able to be quite aggressive on our carbon reductions. And what you are seeing is actually, how it changes between now where we are in 2023, where basically nationally we'll have around, you can see sort of on the graph. I'll try to just get the scales right in my head. Actually, the scales look like they're working wrong, but you can see the dramatic reduction from 2023 down to carbon budget 6. And carbon budget 6 is a 78% reduction in carbon from 1990 levels. So from the left-hand side right the way down. And that 78% reduction is stark. It is also committed in law. So if we don't do that, the government breaks the law. Now, intriguingly, the little thin line is coming upwards is the carbon emissions from construction. So what you can actually see is construction is increasing since 1990, while the overall economy is decreasing. So we're about to introduce Lower Thames Crossing into an environment which has got a dramatically changing attitude towards carbon in terms of its construction and its operation. And in a world where actually we need to see a 78% reduction from 1990, which in construction terms is actually greater than that. So very, very challenging context in terms of carbon. And then how that manifests itself in planning and the permitting system is really difficult, but also into legal challenge. So with all of that carbon conversation, it's probably worth then just diving in fairly deeply into the carbon on Lower Thames Crossing. So Lower Thames Crossing, as you'd expect us to, we do an assessment over 60 years, including construction. And back in 2020, we ran it, and we had that sort of circle on the left. So that circle on the left is the total emissions over 60 years associated with the crossing. And then as we go forward, we're going back to this rapid decarbonisation going to law. Government brought into bear a thing called the decarbonisation of transport, which what you can see is a big change in the round, in the donut. So the left-hand side, the total is 7 million tonnes of carbon over 60 years, of which 25% roughly is construction and maintenance. So 75% is road use. It's sort of what you'd expect. Most of the vehicles are using are internal combustion engines using petrol and diesel to power themselves. Therefore, that kind of makes sense. Well, as we are rapidly moving to EV and actually have solved much of the road transport issues, when you move to the 2022 assessment of it, of course, that road user carbon has dropped from on the left-hand side, it being around 5 million tonnes to it's dropped to about 0.7 million tonnes. So suddenly we've gone from construction emissions no longer being 25%, but being more like 60%. And it's changing the dynamic completely. And that in itself is dramatic. And it's probably the first project that's actually seen that at this scale, where suddenly carbon in construction is as, if not worse, than in operation. My background is ex-aviation, so at Heathrow, as Giuliano said, and I did a number of projects there, including Terminal 5, Terminal 2, and then I finished up on the third runway. And when you looked at our emissions, which is pretty normal for any transport, if you looked at our emissions there, 95% of the emissions were in aviation, in the air, 5% was on the ground at the airport. And that's sort of how you tend to feel about it. Your construction is normally much less carbon than the whole life carbon of the operation. It's now changed. Certainly in road transport, it has dramatically changed, and therefore actually the bad guy in terms of carbon is how we build it as opposed to how we operate it. So that sort of gives you a bit of a flavour for what LTT is and how it exists. So I've sort of put this slide together just to really reflect on how then do you move forward with a project as complex or as difficult as LTC. So we've got so the key attributes of this project are we've got an incredibly strong economic and strategic business case. The economic side of it is because we've got this massive amount of delay. The strategic side of it is we've got an aging piece of infrastructure that if it were to fail, it would absolutely cripple the country. So there's a compelling need for us to get on and do a project, which is always a good thing, always a really good thing to know why you're going to do it and know that it's strong and adds up. I think the other thing to say is this is just a road. I'm not building a nuclear power station or a high-speed rail link or hydrogen or anything really that complex. We've been building roads since the Romans. Yes, it's big, but it hasn't got attributes like systems, etc., which make it really difficult. So although we are big and that brings some complexity, it is a simple product. So we've got a really simple business case and we've got a really simple product, which is always helpful. It really, really helpful. I think the other overlay, which I haven't yet talked about, is of course you then got to overlay the challenging economic environment that most of the world finds itself in post-pandemic. So actually raising publicly funded, making publicly funded schemes viable whilst you've got a large national debt is very difficult. So being publicly funded is complex and difficult. And it therefore means that every pound you spend is going to be better spent than ever before. But I hope, that carbon analogy, and I could do the same analogy on biodiversity, around the changing environment context and how rapidly that is changing is really, really difficult. On the slide I put this project is first of its type, and I generally do believe that. I think it's the first project where actually construction carbon is probably outweighs the operation. The second first in class is that in the UK, the way we tend to historically have justified planning on permitting in terms of is this project for the greater good and does it fit within our national carbon budgets, is we've said that actually projects that have gone before Lower Thames Crossing don't have a major impact on the overall national emissions. But because of that dramatic the reduction in carbon budget in the UK and where we fall in it and our size, we are no longer that de minimis, that small element of carbon. We're big enough to show up on a national level. So no longer can we hide behind, well, it's all right, we're tiny. We actually need to be able to justify why we do fit into a reducing carbon budget. So that changing environmental context is significant. And if you think about the timeframes we're talking about, 2050 isn't that long away. So the speed we've got to move over the next 10 years, which is really what the time we're going to build this project, is dramatic. So every year it will be ratcheting. I think the last bit that's complex and difficult for us in the UK, we have a highly mobile, highly competent talent pool that delivers mega projects. And a lot of those are on what I call my big brother, so high speed 2. But they're also in the Middle East and elsewhere, and it's a highly competitive market. So with all this uncertainty, will this project go ahead? When will it go ahead? How's the planning affecting it? You have this really difficult piece around how do you attract the great people to the scheme? Because in the end, a project is built by great people. So my biggest risks are associated with when does this project actually start? Because permitting is problematic. Carbon is difficult. Legal challenge tends to flow from carbon. And how actually do you make sure you start day one with great people when actually great people can go and work on a project in the Middle East or the Far East or in the UK, quite happily, that is busy executing. I suppose the last reflection, and it's sort of not written down and deliberately not written down, is that we in the UK, going back to those 5 mega projects we've got, 3 that are currently in construction and 2 that are following. The UK politics is dominated by high speed 2, and it's historically been driven by Crossrail, a previous project, etc., where we have seen projects not deliver necessarily on their original promises. And there is a bit of faith and lack of trust in the mega project environment. So we've got to do all of this in a world where actually people doubt whether we actually say what we mean. So actually being literally doing what you say you're going to do what you say is really, really important. So that's the strategic context. So how then have I responded or my team responded to that to operate Lower Thames Crossing? And this might seem a bit odd, So we thought long and hard and actually realized that our game has to be slightly different, and it's shaped by that sort of strategic piece. And it really is the top 2 points. We've got lots of challenges, but if we've got a strong strategic business case, an economic business case, and a simple product, then that's what shapes how you have to respond. So this is sort of how we've responded. Now, you'll sort of note this is kind of a construct around, it's a bit like a mission statement, but I would argue it's very, very different to that. So I'll sort of walk you through it and I'll try and explain. So we have to produce an outcome that is a new crossing that's there to deliver economic growth through quicker and more reliable journeys. That is a given. It's kind of the bedrock. It is what we're there to do, and it's got to be sustainable. It's got to be delivered in the right time frame. So that's you could argue, is our mission. The reality, though, of course, is because it's a relatively simple thing, because we've got all these broader challenges, actually, it's not about the engineering, how we'd normally focus in on the asset. And I'm delivering a railway, I'm delivering a nuclear power station. It's all about the technicality. But the reality is, ours isn't about the technicality. It's actually quite simple to deliver. Now, my team will curse me for saying that. But it is just a big tunnel. It is large, but it is big, and it is just a road, and it's a big road. It's the largest road we've built in the UK since the M25, which is our last major big motorway building program back in 30 plus years ago. But it is just a road, and we've been building roads since the Romans. So the simplicity of it means that actually it isn't about what you build; it's about how you build it, and that's where becoming a purpose-led program has come into being for us. So this is, why are we here? Are we here just to build a road, or are we here to build a road that makes a difference? And I flippantly, about 2 years ago, started to say, look, we're going to build the greenest road ever. And everyone asked me, what do I mean by that? Well, it's actually, we are going to try and break that paradigm that big infrastructure is bad for the environment and is not sustainable. We are going to push that paradigm and go, we can build a large piece of economic infrastructure that is truly sustainable. And it is a road, and that will be difficult, and it will be challenging, and there is carbon involved in it. But how do we actually do that? So we challenged our team and to come up with a purpose statement. Now, what you've got with building a better world there is a brief summation of that. And this is where life has changed quite a lot. So we spent a couple of, let's say 9 months as a leadership team. What is that going to be? And it incorporated things like we need to create a sustainable entity. We need to focus on our people. There's a huge number of strands inside of that sort of purpose of how we're going to do it. And we also, at the same time, asked our whole project population of about 300 odd people. And then, of course, we got ChatGPT to crunch the 300. So we spent 9 months of a leadership team of about 12 people to come up with a strapline. And we challenged the whole of our team, 380 people, in about 30 minutes to just feed stuff into ChatGPT. And of course, ChatGPT came up with the same answer that my leadership did in 9 months. It did it in 30 minutes. Now, I'm not going to make any comment about whether it could run a mega program, but it suddenly shows you life is very different. No longer do you need to do lots of post-it notes. You just need to feed stuff into your phone, basically. But the strapline that both groups came up with, whether it be the broader population, is people don't come to work to build a road. They come to make a positive impact on the planet in one way or another. They interpret that in different ways. And as a team, we came, the sort of building a better world was the way it summarized best for the team. So that's a sort of high level purpose statement, but really it's then how you chunk it down into what we call our 4 strategies, which really is having a ruthless focus on carbon and biodiversity. And the left-hand side, big, really great construction, and understanding that this is a simple piece of construction, but do it brilliantly. There's a huge part that supports all of that, which is around actually our people is probably the most important part of this. If we're not people, then we aren't anything. So this is about culture and ensuring that we've got people are completely aligned, that we've got the right workforce, and we've got a workforce that is diverse and brings every attribute that we need to make ourselves successful, and go on the basis that we want to do this differently and better. and we want to focus on the how, then actually we need to make sure we are focusing on having a broader, more diverse workforce. And then the last bit is, of course, we're doing this and we're creating an asset that will be with its communities forever. So we need to make sure that we are community focused, and we've actually chunked it in three ways. There's local community and really focusing around making sure that the local community feel that part of it in every shape or form, whether it be the benefits or whether it be the actual construction. But there's more piece around actually the construction industry and recognizing that we're large, but a relatively small percentage of the overall UK construction market. But it's important that if we're going to do this differently and want to do it differently and will be successful in doing it differently, then we need to change the UK construction market with us as we do it. And I'll talk about that in a bit in a moment. And then the last bit is around, obviously, we've got to do it with the national context of actually, there's no point in doing this and not having a positive impact on the wider economy. This is probably our biggest single differentiator, is we are focusing on being a purpose-led program. Now, there's lots of good examples of purpose-led organizations, whether it be Patagonia, which is my favorite, B Corps are often described as it, but you don't often see pop-up programs. So I would argue that this is probably the first big at-scale purpose-led program, and it's different from mission statement. This is about us truly making sure that our purpose is a sustainable purpose that leaves, everything we do leaves a better world behind us. Whether it be the outcomes of what we're trying to achieve in terms of the product, the road, or whether it be the way we do it or the workforce we lead. So what I'm going to do now is just going to walk through those four columns, and you'll start to see the depth of it. I've tailored it to the time frame we've got, so there's much more carbon than the rest, because actually the rest we are doing lots on, but most of our narrative at the moment is around carbon, and probably that's where the conversation would go. But I'm more than happy to talk about almost all of it in the questions. So very quickly on carbon, I'm going to try and speed up slightly to make sure we give time for questions. So we are declared in the UK a carbon pathfinder project, which basically says we are going to push the boundaries of carbon beyond that's ever been delivered before in terms of taking it out of construction. Which means in itself is we're going to deliver it for the lowest practicable carbon emissions in the time frame we've got. Now, if we built it 10 years later, technology we moved on, it would be even lower. So what that means is we've got to focus on low carbon innovation and approaches and really go at it. And at the same time, we've got to make sure that we leave a legacy that this doesn't get lost. So Carbon Pathfinder is sort of the center of our carbon proposition. That is in the context of a broader national highways ambition of let's get the whole of the national highways portfolio, that bigger portfolio, to a net zero construction and maintenance by 2040. So we're going to go as far as we can on Lower Thames Crossing, with the idea that we're going to bring it on much more low carbon construction thereafter in the 2030s to deliver the broader national highways ambition. So what do we? I'll give you an example of what we've done to date. So, you need, for carbon, you need to know your numbers. The second thing you need to do is you need to really then plan to reduce it. And we've done it a number of ways, and apologies for the three-letter acronym on here, I've just noticed. So we started off in a 2020 baseline, really quite detailed, because our planning is very detailed. Therefore, our design is detailed at this stage. So we know exactly what we're going to build. We know how we're going to build it. Therefore, we can add up and get to a very accurate carbon number. We've then put that into our planning application, our permitting system, and we've committed to reduce as a minimum, we're going to reduce it by 30%. So give you the numbers, that's about 2 million tons it's just over 2 million tons of construction carbon, which we've reduced down by 30%, which gets us to about 1.8 million tons. So that's the first 30% is 1.8 million tons. We then spent the last 2 years talking to the supply chain, going out to market, and having carbon at the center of our procurement. And we challenged the market to get to our 30%. And if I'm honest, we challenged them to do it for free, and they did. And what surprised us was, and what we're about to announce more publicly over the next week or so, is actually what they've returned is that is more than 30%. They are willing to commit in their contracts to a 50% reduction in carbon from a 2020 baseline. So going back to my initial thing about carbon budget 6, 78% reduction from 1990. So 50% reduction from a 2020 baseline, still not enough. So therefore, we've then got a second piece around actually how do we drive further? And in that same procurement, we challenged them to give us a list of good ideas that we could work with them to keep going beyond. And if you take the numbers back against the 2020 baseline, they then gave us anywhere between a 25 and a 30% further reduction in carbon. So actually that lowest that we could get to probably is more like 75 or 80%. Now we've got to close that gap. There's a load of stuff inside of that we now need to work together to do. And we've done that in a way by doing that early. So we're probably 2 years ahead of construction, and we've now got our team assembled, or as of next week, we'll have our team assembled. So we've got 2 years to really nail that 50 to 80%. And then obviously we'll keep driving it down as low as possible. And then there will be an offsetting element, which gets us to carbon neutral. So our plan in the end is to go carbon neutral on a piece of infrastructure that is, a £9 billion road scheme and a massive tunnel, which will definitely be the first ever done in the world like that. So recognizing that we're doing this as a one-off, and recognizing our supply chain, of course, it looks at us as a one-off. We've got to make sure that we don't just make them do it on our project and then they go back to normal ways. We've actually got to make sure that there is a pipeline of low carbon work that they can then go onto and actually become competitive in and win. So in doing this journey, we realized that we can't just be selfish. We've got to encourage other clients to come with us. And so we're currently on a roadshow, and you're part of it by me picking the slide up. So we're currently trying to get a minimum of 20 other infrastructure clients in the UK. So the bulk of the infrastructure market, we're trying to get to sign up to a similar type of journey. And the 5 asks, and I won't particularly go into these in massive amount of detail, is sort of what I've outlined. Go out to market. Well, so know your numbers in terms of carbon. Go to market and contract on low carbon, such that it's a contractual requirement in your construction, and then have roadmaps or strategies to deal with the bulk emissions, which tend to be on big infrastructure, diesel. Well, it's movement, so diesel, concrete, and steel. And I won't talk any more about that. If people want to ask questions, they can. I suppose then just a sort of side view of the broader stuff. So that's carbon. It is the center of what we're doing, but we can't be just delivering on carbon. We've got to deliver on every part of the green agenda. So this is just gives you a flavour of the sort of stuff we're doing. Although we're 22 kilometres of road, we are going to deliver 768 hectares of improved natural environment. And you can see the stats on here, whether it be ponds, whether it be hedgerows, significant investment. So although it's only 22 kilometres of road, we tend to build more of everything else. I think that the most obvious one that's sort of our flagship at the moment. So very early on, we've gone out and bought a 95 hectare site that's right next to our existing assets. And as of last year, we started planting it. So this is literally a year ago, almost to the day, where we started planting 150,000 trees. And even if the project doesn't go ahead, there will be a community forest at a scale that hasn't been seen in the UK for a while. So these are big scale interventions, whether they be on carbon or on biodiversity. So that's sort of the sustainability side of it, and focusing on the complexity of that. I'm just going to quickly talk. I've got 2 slides on the other 2 pillars really. So there's a bit around construction. I'm not going to make any excuses for keeping this really brief, because it is a really simple product. So basically, it's about doing things brilliantly. So it's brilliant basics, whether that be control, whether it be cost management, all that good stuff. I suppose the 2 differentiators I would argue we're pushing for is having a real productivity focus through digital. Lots of people are talking about doing that, and so we're no different from that. But from a road perspective, we're going to try and be as much as possible factory driven, and this is one of the factories that we're going to be using. So in the UK, we currently have built 5. Well, I think we might be on building the 5th, 4 or 5 motorway bridges, or bridge bridges. Or motorway or railway bridges have been built in the UK in a factory. We're going to build 35. So this is about getting to a point where we are supersizing and doing stuff more reliably in factories. And we think we'll have 3 factories. So real focus on offsite manufacture, digital to enable that. And all of that unlocks carbon, but it also gives you predictability around cost. So that's construction. I'm trying to give you the time for questions. So the last then bit is culture and community. Now I've kind of talked about the importance of diversity. So there's importance of diversity to think differently is so important. But there's also this bit about we've got to encourage diversity because actually we've got to have a workforce that comes from a different place. And we've got to leave that workforce with a different set of skills. So we, like anyone, any big program, we've got targets on apprentices, on graduates, on raising skill standards, and it's kind of very standard. And this is one of our early apprentices that we've already appointed. But we've also got to recognise that we're trying to do this differently. Therefore, we need to raise skills. So there's kind of a how do we help local people get into local work in a more diverse fashion? At the same time, we want to make sure that we leave an embedded carbon understanding. So we're running a carbon academy that allows our people to be the best they can be, our supply chain to be the best they can be in terms of competitiveness in terms of carbon or decarbonisation, etc. So we've got a carbon academy piece, and then I'm coming to the sort of the last bit. So back to that diverse thing. And how do you have a community that feels they own a road, etc.? It's a bit around how, having local jobs for local people. So we've got a very high target for a local workforce because we're in the right part of the UK for that. It's the right sort of people, right type of workforce. But if we really want them to be, to be really maximise it, we need to be attracting a broader church of individuals. So that's a more diverse workforce. It's not the normal Megaproject where it's dominated by people away from home, away from their families. This is trying to flip that dial. So local and diverse come together, but likewise, so does doing it differently and diverse. So for us, that diversity thing is so important and at the heart of it. And our role as the client on this scheme is to ensure that we create this environment to allow our supply chain in its broadest sense to maximize its diversity. But without doing that diversity, we won't be successful in the carbon arena, we won't be successful in the biodiversity arena, we won't be successful in the construction arena. And more importantly, the locals won't be involved. So this diverse thing is so important. I'm very conscious I could talk about this for hours and you want to ask questions. So I'm going to literally go to my last slide, which is a bit of a joke, and I've sort of said it a couple of times. So on the left-hand side is the road network in England and Wales in AD 80, so 2,000 years ago. If you look on the right, it's the strategic road network that is now. It's not that dissimilar, if I'm being brutally honest. It's slightly differently drawn. So, I'm not building a piece of infrastructure that's going to set the world on alight in terms of its technology. I'm not putting a person on the moon, and I'm not creating the cutting edge of science. I'm creating something quite simple. So it's not about what it is, it's about how you do it. And I think the key is to understand that that's the important thing, and that's what will get us through the permitting system. It's what will attract people to the project in a highly competitive market, but it's also what it will make us successful. And with that, I think I'll stop there, Juliana, and hand over to you on questions. I'll stop sharing as well. And how do I need to get rid of this, don't I?
That was a brilliant presentation, Matt. Thank you very much for highlighting all the efforts you are doing on carbon and wider environmental issues on this project. It's absolutely fantastic. We have one question here that fits very well with your narrative on carbon. And you mentioned 20 other infrastructure projects in the UK and that you are on a roadshow to agree on some targets. The question is coming from outside the UK. Which countries or organizations are leading the decarbonization agenda? So if you did any market sounding or consultation on that, or where is best practice coming from? Can we learn something and can we share, give something back to them?
So the answer is yes, you have to look around the world. If you take decarbonisation, and I've become a bit of an expert on this, globally, sort of Northern Europe is where most activity is going on. I spent a lot of time looking at Megaprojects, all, whether it be in the Far East, Middle East, the States, Africa, literally anywhere you look. We all tend to do it relatively similar ways. However, in Scandinavia, there is definitely slightly different drivers, slightly different political environment. So we spent a lot of time looking at what's going on in Norway and Sweden and Denmark, and I spent quite a bit of time in Oslo, where Oslo itself is doing something quite revolutionary around pushing very hard on carbon. So back in 2016, they declared that they would take 95% of the city's emissions out by 2030, which is way beyond anybody. And that, of course, has led them to do something very different. So while in the UK, we currently have something in the order of 10 diesel-free construction sites, so not using diesel, replacing them with other forms that aren't fossil fuels. In Oslo city itself, they have some 60 plus diesel-free construction sites, and they're going beyond that. Now, they're relatively small in the scale of construction, but it's a really interesting experiment in how you stimulate a market to move quite quickly. And because of the nature of their geography, it works really well. So they've done quite revolutionary things there, and we've learned lots from them. And I suppose the simple thing, and I put it up on that diagram very quickly, we've the A to G metrics, which are the way you buy fridges in the UK, etc., and sort of energy performance certificates. Having a really simple message that communicates what you're trying to do is really important, and that's what they've done brilliantly, both on concrete and on diesel free. And so our intention is to basically supersize. There was then a movement more into Holland and Denmark, etc., where and there are others doing clever things there. And what we're trying to do is ensure that we spread. We need to move at what is a global construction market, whether that be of materials or predominantly of materials. We need to move the whole of the world global construction market to help us to do it. And we're too big not to do that. So we've got to change UK construction, and we've got to somehow have an impact at a global scale. So my team, I have a section of my team that's dedicated in just trying to take people with us.
Brilliant. I want to bring the topic of hydrogen, and we got a few questions there. You didn't touch on this particular aspect of the project. I know it's quite new, but I'm also aware that you're doing some very interesting initiatives around this topic to push industry forward. So I wonder if you could share a bit more of what you're doing and the journey to arrive where you are.
So hydrogen. So if you take our total emissions as a construction project, and it will be very similar to any major civil engineering project, and to some extent energy project as well, the emissions tend to be in three things: steel, concrete, and diesel. And the percentages will vary a bit, but typically your diesel will be somewhere between 20 and 40%. So diesel is a huge part of your emissions, and it's actually one of the easiest things to get rid of. Typically, you would say, okay, electric seems to be the way to go, and that does at the moment seem where the market has been, or up until now, the market has been going that way. The problem with electric is the size of the batteries you need for the size of the kit. So anything up to 10 tons can easily be dealt with by an electric, by going to an electric vehicle type arrangement with batteries. And typically your utilization of those is limited. So you're using them 5 to 8 hours a day, and you can therefore charge them up overnight. When you start to go to the larger equipment, which you tend to want to use 24/7 or at least 18 hours a day, you haven't got the time to charge it. You also haven't got the energy to actually do the heavy lifting, whether it be a 40-ton excavator or a 70-ton dump truck. You just don't get the energy transfer quick enough. And so therefore you need to get to something that's much more rapid. Now in Oslo, what they're doing, because they've got a great green electric grid, and it's city centre type operation where they've got good high voltage power to everywhere. They're swapping batteries in and out. But in the UK, and the type of work we've got, where we're building a greenfield road where there is no high voltage supply, we need a means of doing a rapid energy supply. So we've gone out to market to buy a third of our diesel energy in green hydrogen. So we're currently about to announce 4 bidders that are bidding for a significant contract that will deliver green hydrogen between 2026 and 2030. And what that will do is takes the uncertainty out of the market, because at the moment the biggest problem with hydrogen is you just don't know where you can get it from. Now, if you knew you could get hydrogen, you would then develop hydrogen plant, etc. So we are, at the same time we're buying hydrogen fuel, we're also talking to the OEMs and who manufacture the plant, and we are confident that they will be within the timeframes we're talking about, being able to bring at scale large volumes of construction equipment that will be able to execute our project. Now, the only uncertainty is, have we bet the right number? Is it 30% of the diesel that we replace by hydrogen, or is it nearer 80%? And I'm on the 80%, my team are on the 30%, and we'll see who wins in 5 years' time.
Excellent. This leads very nicely to other questions coming in about the costs of green technologies in the supply chain and how you engage with suppliers, in essence, to remove carbon. I think you mentioned contract for low carbon. So I was wondering if you could describe this journey of doing something innovative with the supply chain and behaving differently as a client, what the IPA is calling an intelligent client, for carbon, and the tensions between doing that, doing what's right and good for the environment, as we know, in law including, but dealing with the cost increase that might not be there. So in the supply chain, so they might need to develop some innovative solutions to deal with your requirements.
Right. So I'll start with the last, because and I'll repeat it at the end, but it won't cost you more. Is the thing you should bear in mind. Now, it depends how fast you want to push it, but so our 50% reduction in carbon has cost us zero. Absolutely nothing. It's purely because we've been focused on it. And that does come back to your point, or the question really about engagement. So typically, government procurement tends to be very siloed. So what it will tend to do is it'll put out a request to the market and then waits for an answer a couple of years later, or however long it takes. What we've done is engaged throughout the procurement process at the most senior level you can get to in any of our supply chain, to ensure that they understand what we're trying to do. And so at CEO level, we're talking to them saying, look, we are trying to make this the greenest road ever. Come on this journey with us. This is something, and actually improve your business. And so of the multiple competing entities we've talked to, and I've talked to everyone over the last 2 years, and they're not just UK based, they're UK, they're all across Europe. What we found is about a third of them really engaged and understood it and saw it as an opportunity. A third listened and nodded and perhaps didn't take much action, and a third just ignored us. So about a third. But then when it came to the actual bids being submitted, we found that the third that was really engaged and saw it strategically, well, they're the ones that actually bid in and reduced the carbon not to just 30%, but they took it to 50% because they could. And the reason they could is because they thought about doing things differently, and it meant they built less and did less. So there's less money being spent. So not only were they winning on carbon, but they're now winning on cost. And so actually, you can argue that at least 50%, you can get a 50% reduction today, and I'll come to any project in the world and I'll prove it to you, if you can get that for free, because it just takes the waste out that we inherently put into the system. To go further, to go the next up to 75 or 80%, we think you'll probably, well, actually don't. So to go right the way to carbon neutral, we think to go that much further, we'll have to put 2% additional cost into the project. But 2% on the base cost, not on the total cost. So essentially, if you can save that out of risk, then it's zero. So but only 2%. Now, some bits will pay more and some bits will pay less. Now, in the UK, and it is helpful to reflect on this. So my business case has a negative cost of carbon in it. So I have all the cost of it, the cost of building it. I have all the benefits, and then you put the two together and you stack them up. But in the UK, we also evaluate the cost impact of carbon. And in the UK at the moment, it's £280 a tonne of carbon. So if I can get rid of carbon out of my asset, I improve my business case by £280 for every tonne. Therefore, as long as I spend under £280, it makes sense. And that reduction down to zero is going to, on average, cost us about £100 a tonne. So it will strengthen our business case. Yes, it will cost you a bit more money in the end, that to zero, but actually it makes the business case even stronger. So my argument is you can get 50% absolutely for free without any cleverness. And arguably, actually, for cheap, you could get money back with that. You can take it further. if you actually value the cost of carbon, and I was talking to some Australians the other day, and they don't yet value the cost of carbon, but you can still get 50% for free.
Fantastic. If we could build on that argument, and you highlighted the next generation of UK mega projects with East West Rail as well, and previous ones on Tideway, High Speed 2, and Crossrail. And I wonder, reflecting on the skills shortage that you also mentioned in the list, and competition of other mega projects and market capacity, now that you're transitioning your organization from planning to delivery, how you are planning to be a client organization? How is that different from previous mega projects? And if carbon has any say in that design of the organization?
I mean, it does hugely. I mean, that's sort of, what you've got to make sure, these mega projects are just pop-up organizations. They're startups. And, we've all heard lots of stories of different startup businesses where they've lost their way, etc. So it's about having a really clear alignment, which comes back to that purpose piece. So what we're trying to do is ensure that the people that turn up on Low Thames Crossing expect to turn up and have carbon at the center of every conversation, every argument. And so we don't want to have a cost, time, quality conversation. We want to have a cost, time, carbon, sustainability, broader conversation. So we want, first off, we want to set an expectation into any new organization. That's what we're going to do. The second piece really is about being really focused on what the client does and where we add value, and actually where we maximize the value of our partners, whether it be our delivery partners or whether it be their supply chain that sits beneath them. And there's a bit real focus about actually let's make sure we focus on what we can do as the client, and we maximize what they can do in each of their roles. So it's not that bit's not rocket science. I think the tough bit in the UK environment is this uncertainty of when you start and how do you make sure you have the right team on day one. And that bit is what keeps me up at night. That's not the carbon piece, because the carbon bit is really quite easy. It's actually about how do you make sure that you've got the A team that arrives on the first day when you don't quite know when the first day is. And that is the really difficult bit, because we can't afford, as we all know, we can't afford to start projects badly, because once you start them badly, they never run. So this is about how does that first day run brilliantly? And that is the next 18 months of my life, basically.
Excellent. I'm conscious of time, and we are approaching 1 hour's lot here. But I do want to close on leadership and leadership practices and your reflections on your role as a leader and enabler of your team and team of teams within and outside your organization. So I wonder how you see that role of enabling a wider team to perform, and then what practices perhaps could be highlighted to share with other mega projects from your personal perspective.
It's partly the stage of the project I'm in. So you got to recognize I'm at the front end, which is different from further on. So leadership practices have to change, and you have to recognize that change. But I would argue that probably the most valuable part, if you're going to get leadership right, the right place to get it is at the front, because that's where all the valuable decisions are made, whether it be the scope or whether it be how you're going to execute it or who you're going to execute it with. So having a real focus and consistency of leadership up front is really, really important. There's also that leadership has got to recognize it's going to be different further on. So how do you make sure that the decisions you're making now are going to still be relevant for the back end? And that's really complex. But the really tough bit about being a leader up front is it's so easy to compromise at the beginning. And the most obvious one is budget. So everyone will say it was so much easier if it was just 20% less or 30% less, whatever it is. And government would approve it. It'd be easy to get past the banks. And you can be overly optimistic so easily, and you can be overly pessimistic so easily. So you've got to be brave up front and argue. You've got to be focused on, can this project get delivered for the envelope you've created, whether it be time, cost, carbon, or anything else. And at the moment, I would argue that we've got political systems, both in the UK and globally, where it's just really difficult to do that, because it's so easy to go, actually, this project should go ahead. And there is this bit about game theory where lots of people would rather promise a lower value on a project, because that's the easy way to get it approved. And then, by the way, the contractor got it wrong, or the cost went up. Well, that's a recipe for long-term unpleasantness on a program. So the key piece of leadership is be brave up front and make, either we do this project for the money it's worth or we don't do it. And that's been my 2 years of arguing, if I'm honest. This project's not worth doing if we can't afford it now. Let's not do it then. Let's not start it because we've kidded ourselves that we can do it for 30% less, because I won't be able to do that. And it's that piece and holding that, and that's what the leader of a program at the beginning has to defend. And the problem, and that's why it's so important that you've got consistency of leadership, and that consistency of leadership understands what goes afterwards. Because if they're not a constructor and they don't understand what follows, then they won't be able to argue it strongly.
Brilliant. On that note of consistency of leadership, that was fascinating to hear your presentation. Can I thank you once again for making the time to join us this afternoon on behalf of the International Project Management Association and also UCL. Thanks for sharing the very interesting narrative and practices and emphasis that you're putting on carbon and sustainability. And I should say, as the School of Sustainable Construction at UCL, we would be more than delighted to host further webinars and developments from Lower Thames Crossing. And I'm sure there will be many practices to share over the coming years. So Matt, thanks again for joining, and I'll see you soon in the next webinar from practices on Lower Thames Crossing.